in the quiet seaside village of Cornwall, where the waves whispered secrets to the shore every morning, Emma and James had been the closest of friends since they were small children. Everyone in the village knew them as the pair who were always together, walking hand in hand down the narrow cobblestone streets or sitting by the harbour watching the fishing boats come home. Emma had bright green eyes that sparkled like the ocean on sunny days, and James had a gentle smile that could make anyone feel better on their worst day. They would spend countless hours exploring the rocky coastline, their pockets full of smooth stones and colourful shells they collected together. During these long walks, they would talk about everything and nothing, sharing dreams about the adventures they would have when they grew up. The years passed quietly in their peaceful village. Emma helped her mother in their small flower shop, arranging bouquets for weddings and special occasions. James worked with his father fixing boats at the harbour, learning to repair engines and mend nets. But no matter how busy their days became, they always found time for each other at sunset, meeting at their special place on the cliff that overlooked the endless blue ocean. When Emma and James turned 18, everything in their calm world suddenly changed. One ordinary Tuesday morning, James received an official letter in the mail that would alter the course of both their lives forever. His hands shook as he read the words he had been both hoping for and dreading. He had been accepted into the Royal Navy and would need to leave for training in just 2 weeks. Emma felt her heart sink when James told her the news that afternoon. She had always known this day might come, but she had pushed the thought away, hoping they could stay in their perfect little world forever. Now reality was pulling them apart, and there was nothing either of them could do to stop it. On their last evening together before James would leave for his military training, they climbed their favorite cliff one more time. The sun was setting over the water, painting the entire sky in the most beautiful shades of soft orange and gentle pink they had ever seen. The ocean stretched out before them like a vast carpet of gold, and seabirds called to each other as they flew home to their nests. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both knowing that everything was about to change between them. Finally, James turned to Emma with tears in his kind brown eyes. "I want you to have this," James said in a voice barely louder than a whisper. He slowly pulled a simple silver ring from his finger, a ring that had become as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. "It belonged to my grandfather. He wore it through to terrible wars and always managed to come home safely to my grandmother. I believe it brought him luck and protection." Emma felt warm tears roll down her cheeks as James carefully placed the precious ring on a delicate silver chain and fastened it gently round her neck. The metal felt warm against her skin, and she could feel the weight of all the love and history it carried. "Promise me you'll wait for me," James whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "Promise me that no matter how long I'm gone or how far away I have to go, we'll find our way back to each other somehow." Emma looked into his eyes and saw her own future reflected there. "I promise," she whispered back, holding the ring close to her heart. "I'll wait for you forever if I have to." 2 months into James's training, just 3 days before he was scheduled to return home for his first leave, a terrible storm struck the Cornwall coast. The wind howled like a wild animal, and the rain fell so hard that the streets turned into rushing rivers. Emma had been volunteering at the local animal rescue center that day, helping to bring frightened pets to safety before the storm grew worse. As she ran across the muddy yard to secure a loose gate, the fierce wind caught her off guard. She stumbled forward, and the delicate chain round her neck snagged on a sharp, broken fence post. Time seemed to move in slow motion as Emma felt the chain snap. She watched in complete horror as James's grandfather's ring flew through the air, spinning and glinting in the grey stormlight before disappearing into the churning, angry waves of the ocean. Emma fell to her knees in the wet sand, frantically, searching through the foam and seaweed. But the ring had vanished completely into the depths of the sea. As the cold rain soaked through her clothes, her heart shattered into a million pieces. She was certain this terrible loss was a sign from the universe that their love was doomed. That perhaps they were never truly meant to be together after all. When James returned to Cornwall 2 weeks later, excited and nervous to see Emma again, he found her family's cottage dark and empty. The neighbors sadly informed him that Emma had packed her belongings and left for university in London just days after the storm, telling everyone she needed to start fresh somewhere completely new. Standing alone on their special cliff, with only the sound of waves crashing below, James felt his own heart break into pieces as sharp as broken glass. He was convinced that Emma had decided to choose a different life, one that didn't include him. 10 years passed slowly, like turning the pages of a sad book that neither Emma nor James wanted to finish reading. The days blended together in a blur of work and loneliness, each of them carrying a piece of broken heart that never quite healed. Properly, Emma threw herself completely into her studies, determined to make something meaningful from her pain. She travelled to universities across England, then to Scotland, and eventually to coastal research stations all around Europe. Everywhere she went, she studied the ocean with an intensity that surprised even her professors. She became an expert in marine science, dedicating every waking moment to protecting and understanding the vast waters that had swallowed her most precious treasure. Her small apartment was always filled with books about coral reefs, ocean currents, and sea life. Photos of underwater worlds covered her walls, but there were no pictures of friends or family. Emma had built walls round her heart so high that even she sometimes forgot what was trapped inside them. The other scientists she worked with often invited Emma to dinner parties or weekend trips, but she always found polite excuses to stay home alone. She dated a few kind men over the years, a professor from Cambridge, a marine photographer from Brighton, even a gentle doctor who reminded her little of James. But every relationship felt like trying to wear clothes that belonged to someone else. Nothing ever fit quite right. Her colleagues would whisper among themselves, wondering why such a brilliant and kind woman always seemed to carry such deep sadness in her beautiful green eyes. They noticed how she would sometimes touch her throat absently, as if reaching for something that was no longer there. Meanwhile, James had spent 8 difficult years in the Royal Navy, sailing to distant ports and learning to live with the constant ache in his chest. He threw himself into his military duties with the same desperate energy that Emma put into her studies. He became an excellent sailor, earning respect from his commanding officers and friendship from his fellow sailors. But late at night, when he stood watch on the deck of whatever ship he was assigned to, James would look out at the endless ocean and think about a girl with green eyes who had once promised to wait for him. He wrote dozens of letters to Emma over the years, but never sent a single one. What could he say? She had made her choice to leave, and he had to respect that decision, even if it broke his heart every single day. When James finally left the Navy after 8 years of service, he found himself standing at a crossroads. He could go anywhere, start fresh in a new city where no memories could hurt him. His Navy friends invited him to join them in London or Liverpool, places where he could find good work and maybe even find love again. Instead, something deep inside, his soul pulled him home to Cornwall. The village looked smaller than he remembered, but the lighthouse still stood tall and proud on its rocky perch, just as it had when he was a boy. The keeper was getting old and needed help, so James took the job without hesitation. There was something fitting about spending his nights guiding ships safely through dangerous waters, using light to help lost souls find their way home. The isolation of lighthouse keeping suited James perfectly. He had convinced himself over the years that he simply was not meant for love, that Emma had been wise and practical to leave Cornwall and build a successful life without him holding her back. During the long, quiet nights, he would tend the great light and tell himself that being alone was better than risking his heart again. Neither Emma nor James knew that fate was working quietly behind the scenes, like a patient gardener tending seeds that would not bloom for many seasons. In the 10th year after they had parted, a terrible hurricane struck the English coast. The storm was unlike anything anyone could remember, with winds so strong they toppled ancient trees and waves so high they crashed over sea walls that had stood for centuries. When the hurricane finally moved on, leaving behind a trail of damage and debris, the beautiful coral reefs round Cornwall had been badly hurt. The local government immediately began looking for marine experts who could help restore the damaged underwater ecosystems. They needed someone with experience, someone who understood both the science of coral growth and the particular challenges of English coastal waters. Emma's name appeared at the very top of every expert list they consulted. After 10 long years of running from her memories, Emma found herself packing a small suitcase and loading her car with diving equipment. Her hands shook slightly as she drove down the familiar winding roads that led back to her childhood home. Everything looked smaller, but somehow more precious than she remembered. She passed the little flower shop where her mother used to work, now run by a young couple with children of their own. She drove past the school where she and James had first met during a Christmas play, when they were both 7 years old and nervous about performing in front of their parents. Finally, she reached the cliff where she and James had made their promise to each other all those years ago. Emma parked her car and stepped out into the salty air, breathing deeply for the first time in a decade. In the distance, the lighthouse stood exactly as it always had, its powerful beam sweeping steadily across the dark water, guiding travelers safely home. Emma did not know that James was there, climbing the spiral stairs every evening to tend the light, still thinking about a girl who had once worn his grandfather's ring close to her heart. Emma spent her first week back in Cornwall working from sunrise to sunset, diving into the damaged coral reefs with the focused determination that had made her famous among marine scientists. She barely stopped to eat meals or admire the familiar sights of her childhood home. Work was her shield against the flood of memories that threatened to overwhelm her every time she looked toward the lighthouse in the distance. The hurricane had been cruel to the underwater world she loved so much. Huge pieces of coral lay scattered across the ocean floor like broken sculptures in a museum that had been ransacked by thieves. Fish that should have been swimming in colorful schools were hiding in the few remaining safe spaces, waiting for their home to be rebuilt. But even in the destruction, Emma could see something that filled her heart with hope. Nature was already beginning the slow, patient work of healing itself. Tiny new coral formations were sprouting from the damaged sections, reaching toward the sunlight that filtered down through the clear blue water. Young fish were beginning to venture out from their hiding places, testing the waters to see if it was safe to play again. Emma documented everything carefully with her underwater camera, taking notes on waterproof paper about which areas were recovering fastest and which sections would need the most help from human hands. She had done this kind of work in dozens of places round the world, but something about working in these particular waters felt different, more personal, as if she was not just healing the ocean, but healing a part of herself as well. On a bright Tuesday morning, when the sun was shining through the water like golden ribbons, Emma put on her diving equipment and prepared for what she thought would be just another routine survey of the reef's PR. Across, the water was clearer than it had been all week, so clear that she could see all the way to the sandy bottom 30 feet below. She swam slowly through the underwater landscape, marveling at how much the reef had changed since her childhood. The coral formations were different now, shaped by 10 years of storms and growth into patterns that were somehow both strange and beautiful. Schools of silver fish moved through the water like living clouds, and sea anemones waved gently in the current like underwater flowers in a secret garden. As Emma swam deeper into a section of reef that looked to be about 10 years old, something unusual caught her trained eye. There, nestled perfectly in the center of a large piece of brain coral, was something that definitely did not belong in the natural underwater world. It was small and silver, glinting in the filtered sunlight like a tiny star that had fallen from the sky above. Emma's heart stopped beating for a moment, and she had to remind herself to keep breathing through her diving equipment. She blinked hard, certain that her eyes must be playing tricks on her, that her mind was seeing what it wanted to see rather than what was really there. But as she swam closer, moving as carefully as if she were approaching a sleeping wild animal that might disappear if startled, the object became clearer. It was definitely a ring, a simple silver ring that looked exactly like the one that had been torn from her neck by the storm all those years ago. With hands that trembled so badly she could barely control them, Emma reached out and gently touched the ring. The coral had grown round it like protective arms, holding it safe and sound through countless storms and seasons. She worked slowly and patiently to free the precious object from its natural prison, being careful not to damage either the ring or the coral that had guarded it so faithfully. When the ring finally came loose, Emma held it up toward the light that streamed down from the surface far above. Even underwater, even after 10 years of being lost, she could clearly see the faded letters engraved on the inside of the band. W.H. 1943. William Harrison, James's grandfather, who had worn this ring through two terrible wars and had always managed to come home safely to the woman he loved. Emma floated there motionless in the gentle current, salt water from her tears mixing with the salt water of the ocean round her. All these years, she had believed that losing the ring had been a sign from the universe that her love for James was foolish and doomed. She had convinced herself that the ocean had stolen her most precious treasure out of cruelty or indifference, but now she understood the truth that changed everything. The ocean had not stolen their love at all. It had been keeping the ring safe all these years, protecting it in the most secure vault imaginable, waiting patiently for exactly the right moment to give it back to her. The coral had grown round it like a natural jewelry box, preserving it perfectly until she was ready to find it again. When Emma finally surfaced and climbed into a small research boat, she sat there for a very long time, holding the ring in her palm and staring toward the lighthouse that stood proudly on the rocky shore. She had spent 10 years running from this place, convincing herself that love was just a silly childhood dream that sensible adults should outgrow. But here in her hands was undeniable proof that some things are truly meant to last forever, that some connections between people are stronger than storms, stronger than time, stronger than fear. The question that now filled her mind was both simple and absolutely terrifying. Was James still somewhere? Ray nearby, and if he was, would he want to see the woman who had disappeared from his life without explanation all those years ago? Emma closed her eyes, took a deep breath of the salty air, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. That evening, as the sun began to set over the familiar waters of Cornwall, Emma found herself standing at the bottom of the narrow stone path that led up to the lighthouse. The ring felt warm and solid in her palm, as if it had been waiting all these years to come home. Her heart was beating so fast and so hard that she was certain it might burst right out of her chest at any moment. She had changed clothes 3 times before leaving her small hotel room, unable to decide what someone should wear when returning a lost ring to the love of their life after 10 years of separation. In the end, She had chosen a simple blue dress that reminded her of the ocean that had brought them back together. As Emma walked slowly up the winding path, she noticed that many things about the lighthouse had changed over the years. The door, which had once been painted white, was now a cheerful shade of blue that matched the summer sky. On either side of the entrance, someone had placed large clay flower pots filled with bright yellow marigolds and purple petunias that swayed gently in the evening breeze. These small touches told Emma that someone definitely lived here now. Someone who cared enough to make the old lighthouse feel like a real home rather than just a place of work. But the question that made her hands shake and her mouth feel dry was whether that someone might be James, or if she was about to embarrass herself terribly by knocking on a stranger's door. Emma stood there for several long minutes, gathering the courage to take the final step. She thought about all the years she had spent running from this moment, all the nights she had lain awake wondering what might have happened if she had been braver, if she had stayed and fought for their love instead of disappearing like a coward. Finally, she raised her hand and knocked softly on the blue door, then stepped back and waited with her heart pounding like thunder in her ears. When the door slowly opened, time seemed to stop completely, as if the entire world had paused to watch this moment unfold. James stood there in the doorway, and Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. He was older now, with fine lines round his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sea spray and bright sunlight. His dark hair was shorter than she remembered, cut in the practical style of someone who spent his days working with his hands. He looked tired, as if he carried invisible weights on his shoulders, but his eyes were still the same gentle brown that had made her fall in love with him when they were both children. "Emma," James whispered, and his voice sounded as if he might be speaking to someone in a dream that he was afraid might disappear if he spoke too loudly. Emma's throat felt tight with emotion, but she managed to find her voice. "Hello, James," she said softly, the words carrying 10 years of longing and regret and hope all mixed together. "I think this belongs to you." With trembling fingers, she opened her hand to reveal the silver ring that had traveled such an impossible journey to bring them back together. James stared down at the ring in complete shock, his eyes growing wide as he recognized the familiar piece of jewelry that had belonged to his grandfather. Then he looked back up at Emma's face, as if trying to make sure she was real and not some cruel trick his lonely mind was playing on him. "But how? Where did you?" James stammered, unable to finish his questions because there were simply too many of them crowding his mind at once. "The ocean gave it back," Emma said simply, as if this explanation made perfect sense. "I found it in the coral reef just this morning. It's been waiting there for 10 years, James. 10 whole years." James stepped aside and gestured for her to come into the lighthouse, his movements careful and uncertain, as if he was still not entirely convinced that this moment was really happening. Emma walked past him into the circular room that served as the lighthouse's main living space, and she was surprised by how warm and cozy it felt. The room was filled with comfortable furniture, a soft sofa covered in blue cushions, a wooden table stacked with books about ships and navigation, and warm lamps that cast a golden glow over everything. This was clearly the home of someone who had learned to live alone, but had tried to make that solitude as pleasant as possible. They sat together on James's sofa, and Emma began to tell him everything that had happened on that terrible night 10 years ago. She explained about the storm, about volunteering at the Animal Rescue Center, about how the chain had caught on the broken fence post and snapped. She described the horrible moment when she watched the ring disappear into the churning waves, and how she had interpreted this loss as a sign that their love was doomed from the start. "I thought you had moved on," James said quietly when she finished her story. "When I came back from training and you were gone. When your neighbors told me you had left for university. "I thought you had found someone better than a simple sailor." Emma felt tears rolling down her cheeks as she realized how much pain they had both carried unnecessarily. "I thought the ring being lost meant we weren't meant to be together," she replied. "I was so afraid of being hurt again, so terrified of loving someone and losing them, that I ran away from everything that actually mattered in my life." They talked through the entire night, sharing 10 years of loneliness, missed connections, career successes that felt empty, and the love they had never stopped carrying for each other despite the distance and time that had separated them. As the sun rose over the ocean, painting the sky in the same soft orange and pink colors they had watched together as teenagers, James reached out and took Emma's hand in his. "Can we try again?" he asked, his voice full of hope and fear in equal measure. "Can we be brave enough this time to fight for what we have?" Emma smiled through her tears, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Yes," she whispered, "let's try." Again, 6 months later, on a perfect summer evening when the sky was painted in soft shades of gold and pink, the entire village of Cornwall gathered on the sandy beach for the wedding of Emma and James. Word had spread quickly through the small community about their incredible story of lost love found again, and everyone wanted to witness this magical moment that felt like something from a fairy tale. Emma looked radiant in a simple white dress that flowed gently in the ocean breeze. Instead of expensive flowers from a fancy shop, she carried a bouquet of wild flowers that she and James had picked together from the cliffs where they used to walk as children. There were purple heather, yellow gorse, and white sea campion, the same flowers they had gathered in their pockets all those years ago, when they were young and believed that love could conquer anything. James stood waiting for her at the water's edge, looking handsome in a dark blue suit that reminded everyone of his years in the Navy. On his finger, he wore his grandfather's silver ring proudly, the same ring that had traveled through to terrible wars, survived 10 years lost in the ocean depths, and somehow found its way home again to bring two hearts back together. The ceremony was timed perfectly for a sunset, so that as Emma and James spoke their vows to each other, the lighthouse behind them began to glow softly in the gathering dusk. The beam of light swept steadily across the calm water, just as it had done every single night while they were apart, faithful and constant, waiting for their return. Emma's coral restoration project had been a tremendous success over the past 6 months. The reef was healthier and more beautiful than anyone could have imagined, teeming with colorful fish and new growth that seemed to celebrate the healing power of patience and care. It seemed as if everything in their world was healing and growing stronger at the same time: the ocean, the coral, and most importantly, their love for each other. The village minister, a kind elderly man who had baptized both Emma and James when they were babies, spoke in a voice that carried clearly over the sound of gentle waves lapping at the shore. "This ring has seen many incredible journeys," he said as James carefully placed the precious band on Emma's finger. "It survived the chaos of war, the fury of storms, and the pain of separation. But today, it begins its greatest adventure. All a lifetime of love between two people who were always meant to be together." The small crowd of villagers cheered and threw handfuls of flower petals into the air as Emma and James kissed for the first time as husband and wife. Children ran along the water's edge, laughing and chasing the colorful petals that danced in the evening breeze like confetti made by nature itself. After the ceremony ended and the guests had moved to the village hall for dancing and celebration, Emma and James walked hand in hand to their special cliff overlooking the ocean. This was the same spot where James had given Emma the ring 10 years ago, where they had made their first promise to wait for each other, and where James had stood alone and heartbroken when he thought she had chosen a life without him. Now they sat together on the soft grass, watching as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The ocean stretched out before them, calm and peaceful, reflecting the light of the full moon like thousands of scattered diamonds floating on black velvet. The water that had once seemed like their enemy now looked like an old friend who had been keeping their greatest treasure safe until they were ready to receive it. "Do you think your grandfather would be happy about all of this?" Emma asked softly, touching the ring on her finger that still felt warm from James's touch during the ceremony. James pulled her closer, wrapping his arms round her as they looked out at the endless water that had brought them back together. "I think he would say that some things in life are definitely worth waiting for," James replied with a smile in his voice. "And I think he would tell us that some kinds of love are strong enough to survive absolutely anything that the world can throw at them." Over the months of planning their wedding and rebuilding their relationship, Emma and James had learned many important lessons about life and love. They had discovered that life rarely goes according to the plans that young people make with such confidence and hope. Sometimes a person has to travel very far from home and experience loss and loneliness before they can truly appreciate the precious things they once had and took for granted. They had learned that sometimes losing something that seems impossibly precious is actually the first step in understanding its true value and meaning. The years of separation had not weakened their love, but had instead made them both stronger, wiser, and more grateful for the gift of finding each other again. But most importantly, Emma and James had learned that real love, the kind of love that comes along only once in a lifetime, never truly dies, no matter how much time passes or how far apart two people might be forced to live. True love waits patiently, like a lighthouse standing strong through storms, ready to guide lost souls safely home when they are finally ready to be found. Emma and James built a wonderful life together in their small village by the sea, working side by side to protect the ocean they both loved. They never forgot the valuable lesson the sea had taught them, that love, like the eternal tides, always finds its way back home to where it belongs. The end.